Good evening, I'm Diana Sky and you're watching World News Tonight here on TVP World. Our main focus on this episode is the wrap-up of the EU Parliament's final hearings for incoming commissioners, with former Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas facing scrutiny over her foreign policy vision. Now, more on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. After the collapse of Germany's ruling coalition, Olaf Scholz is set to face a confidence vote. Russia cannot win, says Kaja Kallas, the European Union's incoming foreign policy chief. And U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet is beginning to take shape. A vote of confidence in Germany's government will come as soon as next month. Now, the country's three-way coalition collapsed last week, triggering political uncertainty across Europe. Our Aaron Damon reports.
In the heart of Cologne, forget politics, it's party time.
I simply don't have my head free for that. After all, we're busy with the 5th season. I couldn't care less. I'm going to the carnival.
But in the back rooms of Berlin's chancellery, a battle is brewing. Chancellor Olaf Scholz has reportedly locked in a date for his vote of no confidence, which he must call on himself and almost certainly lose before a snap election can take place.
It's no problem at all for me to raise the vote of confidence before Christmas, if everyone agrees.
That was Scholz over the weekend, and all roads now lead to December 16 as his likely day of reckoning, despite him initially wanting the vote in January. According to German media, the election itself is set to take place on February 23. It follows a dramatic week in German politics, with the Chancellor putting his three-way coalition in flight mode by sacking Finance Minister Christian Lindner after months of disputes over the country's budget.
I feel compelled to take this step in order to avert damage to our country. We need a government that is capable of taking action and has the strength to make the necessary decisions for our country.
One expert says many will already be looking forward to the future.
It was a zombie government, and frankly, it's a relief that it's going to be going sooner than expected, and I'm sure most of Germany's partners would agree with that as well.
CDU leader Friedrich Merz, who has been a vocal supporter of increasing aid to Ukraine, is being regarded as the likely successor to Scholz, and he wants things to move fast.
We simply cannot afford to have a government without a majority in Germany for several months now, followed by an election campaign for several more months, and then possibly several weeks of coalition negotiations.
Germany appears to face a long road ahead towards political certainty.
Everyone's now in campaigning mode, and so they are also trying to show the differences between them and their rivals. They're trying to show why they are better, and sometimes that involves saying why the others are worse.
But in Cologne, not even a German meltdown can dampen the carnival spirits.
On Tuesday, the European Parliament held its final series of hearings for incoming commissioners, a process that's set to shape EU policy on key issues like foreign affairs, competitiveness, and digital regulation. Now, Kaja Kallas was among those under intense scrutiny as members of Parliament questioned her vision and approach to international relations and EU security. Our European Affairs correspondent Sasha Farbach was on site and has this report.
Well, the world is full of challenges, and this is something that the High Representative, the EU's top diplomat, will have to tackle. Now, Kaja Kallas, herself former Prime Minister of Estonia, brings that wealth of also experience to the table, also someone who had her roots here in the European Parliament itself. Now, from the very get-go, it was very much clear that there would be talk about Ukraine, about Russia, and clearly someone was her stature, someone who is in the last 2 years already talked very much about more strength and more support for Ukraine. Being hawkish on Russia, that was clear to see. The question was, would she convince the others, other different topics still in the world, the Middle East, relations with the United States, the Pacific, you name it, that was also something she had to convince in her hearing here. Now, on Russia, let's hear what she had to say. Some very strong policy in particular on how to deal with it, but also on a global scale.
What comes to Russian threat all across the globe, I totally agree with you. We see these signs, whether it's in Latin America, in Africa, or Asian countries. The misinformation, the competing of narratives, but also the competing of investments and the global power struggle there.
Now, from that also, very clear was that Europe, when she said, needed to do more on defense. So she did say that Europe should not be building its own army. The EU does not need one. Europe should focus more, and the European Union should focus more on industrial strength, about building its defenses, and leave NATO and its command structure as a military element of that. So very much, I think, putting to rest certain fears that she would try and push a European army. This is not what happened. And she did criticize, of course, still that more needs to be done with sanctions, more needs to be done with investment for defense. Now, speaking to different MEPs here, it was clear that there was generally support. There was strong background, strong credentials she brings to the table, and that was evident as to the MEPs that we spoke to here after her hearing.
She will have a very good team. They will make a policy line. What is important, I mean, she has enough of energy to implement this policy line. She's young enough and looks like very committed, so I'm sure she will be covering all major issues of the foreign and security policy of the European Union.
Now, with that, it is no easy job, and confirmation is still not 100% settled, but she did, as we talked to various parliamentarians here, MEPs, that there was positive notes on her performance, and this is someone who has handled herself well, and it's very clearly will likely pass the test to tackle a whole host of problems across the world. That's Sasha Farbach for TVP World in Brussels.
The dam holding the Kurakhove reservoir in Donetsk sustained damage in a Russian attack on Monday as Ukrainian forces continue to repel multiple Russian assaults in the direction of Kurakhove. Now, joining us with the latest is our Ukraine correspondent, Oz Chatterjee, who's coming to us live from Kyiv. Good evening, Oz. What do we know about the damage to the dam?
Well, we only know what local officials are able to tell us now. Unfortunately, they say they haven't been able to get to the dam to inspect the damage, but they do believe that it has sustained damage. And they know this. It's been reported that high water levels continue to flow downstream of the Vovcha River. Now, local officials say there is no flooding as of yet. However, they are monitoring the situation. They've also said that the Russians have been attacking the area for about 3 months now. We do know heavy fighting is ongoing in that direction. The Russians are trying to assault it, not just via ground assaults using armored columns, but also across the river using small boats. So again, we are only able to tell you what the local officials are able to tell us right now. The area is coming under sustained damage, but they are monitoring the situation there. They say there is no critical point at the moment, but obviously one to keep an eye on, and hopefully the local officials are going to be able to keep on top of it and prevent any flooding from reaching those settlements in the east of the country downstream of the Vovcha River.
Thank you so much, Oz Chatterjee, coming to us from Kyiv in Ukraine. The first U.S. Navy missile defense base in Poland is set to open on Wednesday. Now, the base located near the Baltic Sea coast will strengthen Poland's defenses. Meanwhile, Warsaw is moving forward with the construction of border defense infrastructure on the country's frontier with Russia and Belarus, worth more than 2 billion euros. Our Marek Steele has the next report.
Located in Redzikowo near the Baltic Sea, the first U.S. Navy missile defense base in Poland is capable of intercepting ballistic missiles and other airborne threats.
It has not only military importance. The sole presence of NATO, U.S. structures, U.S. soldiers is vital. If they become a target, that is a declaration of war.
The war in Ukraine and ongoing hybrid operations by Russia and Belarus have prompted NATO's eastern flank countries to overhaul their defenses. Apart from modernizing the military, Poland has put forward an infrastructure project on its eastern border. Construction started 2 weeks ago.
Poland's border with Russia and Belarus will not only be the most protected border in Europe, it will also be the most innovative border in the continent.
In addition to fortifications and natural obstacles, the East Shield will include threat detection technology and anti-drone systems.
Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia have started building the Baltic Defence Line, which will be connected to the East Shield. And together with these countries, but also with Finland, we will form a line of fortifications which will be unpassable.
The Polish section of the fortifications will stretch from the Baltic Sea to Poland's border with Ukraine. The project is expected to cost €2.3 billion.
This is the eastern border of the European Union and NATO. Because of this, there should be substantial involvement of Western capital. I believe this involvement is essential.
The Financial Times has reported that EU member states may soon have more flexibility in redirecting cohesion funds to support their defense.
The fact that this possibility became a reality is a good sign that the European Union does understand the complexity of the moment.
An idea itself is a good one. I mean, to use for something good, for something jointly used as defense and security. But I'm sure, it's not enough.
The threats felt on the eastern flank of NATO are not isolated anymore. The French president, who met with the NATO Secretary General on Tuesday, said France was determined to spend more on defense than the roughly 2% of GDP, which the country will have spent by the end of the year.
For too long, Europe has avoided bearing the burden of its own security and considered that it could, in a way, receive the dividends of peace. The two military programming laws that we are in the process of completing will have doubled the armed forces budget.
Defense spending across NATO has skyrocketed since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. This year, a record 23 NATO members are expected to comply with NATO's 2% of GDP on defense threshold. Poland tops the rank with more than 4% this year.
Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski underscored the urgency of taking action on European security in Warsaw on Tuesday during his meeting with outgoing EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell. Now, his message was clear. With Donald Trump, a noted Ukraine skeptic, set to take office in January 2025, Europe must take greater responsibility for its own defense. Kazimierz Łysiak has more.
Having just come back from his final trip to Kyiv as the EU chief of diplomacy, there seemed to be a sense of urgency in the press statement of Josep Borrell in Warsaw on Tuesday.
We cannot be in the situation where the US act and the Europeans react. We have to take our own responsibility.
This urgency comes mainly because of the new president-elect in the United States. Donald Trump has hinted multiple times he's not keen on supporting Ukraine financially and militarily like the Biden administration used to. For Poland, Ukraine's direct neighbor, it's vital for Europe to take charge.
We will have a very serious discussion at the next Foreign Affairs Council on what we do or don't do at this council and in other councils may depend the future of this region, the credibility of the European Union.
One such decision could be for European countries to follow Poland's example and spend more on defense. Warsaw is allocating more than 4% of its GDP for this, aiming to reach close to 5% next year. But as many as 8 countries haven't yet reached the NATO requirement of 2% GDP per year.
Now, European nations are not ready to deliver support because they haven't launched defense industries at full capacity. Russia now is capable to produce per 2 or per 3 months more artillery ammunition than Germany has in their storage facilities. So this is alarming.
With Donald Trump scheduled to return to office in January 2025.
Thank you, everybody.
And with Russian troops fighting with increased intensity in Ukraine, time is of the essence for Europe. But experts are not convinced firm decisions will be made shortly.
Europe would need to purchase a lot of equipment in order to replace the equipment that the United States has been sending. That is not realistic in the short term.
According to a Polish Foreign Ministry source, Minister Radosław Sikorski will use the upcoming Foreign Affairs Council to try and convince other European leaders to start spending more on defense sooner rather than later. The council is to take place next Monday, on November 18th.
The first names are in for President-elect Donald Trump's upcoming administration. Now, while the appointees are hawkish on Russia in rhetoric, there are signs that Kyiv is in for a rough ride. Our Michael Van Bloomstein reports.
With the dust settled on the US elections, those in Trump's favor are receiving phone calls with offers for his upcoming administration. 3 key foreign policy positions have already been decided. For Secretary of State, the US version of a foreign minister, Trump has reportedly approached Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Fellow Floridian Mike Waltz, a congressman, will be appointed as National Security Advisor. And Elise Stefanik, a congresswoman from New York, will become ambassador to the United Nations.
I don't think that Donald Trump specializes in foreign policy, so he's going to have to rely on his advisors, but he wants his advisors this time to cooperate with him more closely because he's very disappointed with the people that he chose the first time around.
Still, European politicians were waiting for the news with anticipation.
Senator Rubio was a critic of Nord Stream, and so we like him on those grounds. And he's a serious player.
Rubio has indeed been a critic of Russia and has acknowledged the Kremlin's expansionism.
The Russians argue that they're a great power who deserve to have buffer nations outside of their borders that they have control over.
But Rubio's stance has shifted over time. In a recent interview with Today, he said the US is, in his view, funding a stalemate that is costing lives. That is more in line with the position of Donald Trump.
Obviously, it paid off for him because he's about to become the United States Secretary of State. But it's really hard. I mean, I think his instincts tend to be hawkish. And so in that sense, it will be helpful to Ukraine.
Mike Waltz, a Trump loyalist who is going to be appointed National Security Advisor, has similar views on Russia and Ukraine. He's been critical of aid packages for Kyiv, but he has also called for increasing the energy stranglehold on Russia.
So I think that will get Putin to the table. We have leverage like taking the handcuffs off of the long-range weapons we provided Ukraine as well. And then, of course, I think we have plenty of leverage with Zelensky to get them to the table.
Like Trump, Waltz is more concerned about China than Russia and would want to get the war in Ukraine done as soon as possible in agreement with Putin, experts say.
It will probably end up, if Trump has his way and that approach is used, I think Ukraine will be partitioned, which is something that I think is, from my personal standpoint, is regrettable, but I could see that happening to get the war stopped.
Volodymyr Alexandrovich Zelensky. However, Kyiv has anticipated a possible Trump victory. According to the Financial Times, 2 points of the Ukrainian victory plan presented last month were specifically added to appease Republican politicians. These were replacing US troops stationed in Europe with Ukrainians and sharing Ukraine's natural resources with Western partners. It's unclear whether that will convince the new administration in Washington.
And in fact, after that report, we have just gotten confirmation that Mike Waltz has been confirmed as Trump's new national security advisor. Ursula von der Leyen is finalizing the European Commission while former Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas faces scrutiny over her foreign policy stance as she aims to become the EU's next foreign policy chief and one of the Commission's 6 vice presidents. But who will make the cut as the new commissioners, and who has succeeded and who has faltered in winning support for their EU policy vision? Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is Tomasz Zając, analyst at the Polish Institute of International Affairs.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Good evening, sir. Now,
welcome. Thank you for having me.
Kaja Kallas, former Estonian Prime Minister, is seeking to become the EU's foreign policy chief, is going to have to wait at least one more day to learn the decision concerning her candidacy, as she failed to convince the far right parties in the EU Parliament. Now, her opponents are accusing her of quite a hawkish stance on Russia. What can you comment on this? What is your take on this?
This is a very interesting issue because actually the very fact that she has been appointed as a high representative for foreign affairs in the EU proves that the approach of the EU has changed, because this very hawkish stance towards Russia, this is something that would have made her it would have made absolutely impossible for her not so long time ago actually to have this position. But actually I think what is important for us in the region and Poland very specifically is actually for this position to be delabeled or unlabeled as hawkish and be realistic. So for the Western Europe, what Kaja Kallas is saying right now, what is I think pretty obvious and not very controversial for most of the people living in this region, this was considered hawkish some time ago in the Western Europe. Now the fact that she has been appointed as the high representative for the foreign policy proves that in the elite of the EU, this approach towards Russia has been changed, and I think it's a good news.
What are some challenges that she's going to face as she tries to become, as she's aiming now to become the EU foreign policy chief, and how is she going to influence actually the EU's foreign policy?
So first of all, I think one shouldn't overestimate her role. Let's be realistic about that. I don't want to, argue that it doesn't matter, but the main course of the EU's foreign policy is in the hands of member states. But this doesn't mean that, this position is meaningless. No, not at all. I think that the main course will be, like I said, decided by the member states, but as regards the implementation of this policy, and a lot actually can be changed, in implementation, the nitty-gritty details of some things, this will be up to Kaja Kallas. So I think that she will have to some extent an important role. What we are waiting for actually is the white paper on the defense that she will co-wrote with the Commissioner for the Defense and Space. Ursula von der Leyen promised that this document will be available within the first 100 days of the new Commission, and then we will see what will be this course of action that will be implemented. Because I would argue that European institutions usually try to stick to those promises made in this kind of documents.
What do you think her approach is going to be about the future of EU future assistance to Ukraine?
Clearly, so she's from Estonia, like I said, from the region. She's aware of the Russians' foreign policy, its main goals, its methods. So I wouldn't expect anything dangerous, so to speak, towards Russia. I think she will try to state the course that has been settled since 2022, meaning trying to refrain Russia from further action, trying to higher the cost of any hostile actions of Russia towards any countries of the EU. And I think she will try to do this, but hopefully she will also try maybe to steer this policy a little more, to be more realistic, meaning that there is this, European Union's foreign policy is the policy of the lowest common denominator. And I think that Kaja Kallas will try to push this denominator to become a little bit, bigger in a way that tried for this policy.
By pushing that too bigger, do you mean she's going to want to increase EU defense spending?
Exactly. Although, again, this is a decision that will be made by member states, but High Representative can, just like feed with some ideas. Also has a position of Vice President of the Commission. She will be present during, all the important high-level talks there. So yeah, absolutely. I think she will try to put this idea on the table. She will try to make this idea be workable.
What are some concerns that her opponents have raised about her position on various topics, including about Russia, if we're still on that topic of Russia?
So I think I would say that there are two main issues here. One regards Russia, and the other maybe I would go beside Russia. So the first one is clearly her hawkish, considered by some member states too hawkish, and the way she talks maybe about Russia, her ideas, that this is provocative, that Russia, will find this, that will interpret these actions as hostile. And this is, the very old song, so to speak, that, if you will be assertive towards Russia, this will only provoke Russia. And the second issue, actually, and here I would like to go, beyond Russia, is actually, I think nobody denies her expertise regarding the Eastern dimension, but what some MEPs and member states who are not, obviously this is a key topic for most member states, but some member states have also interest in the southern dimension. So there were many actually, media articles regarding how she was trying to catch up her knowledge regarding the southern dimension, the conflicts there. And I think some MEPs and member states, they are afraid of the fact that she will forget about the South, which is important for many member states.
What about Fito? I mean, he's going to face some challenges too, right, with his Italian right-wing government. What can you tell me just very briefly about Fito?
So I think what was happening so far, it was pretty surprising, because I think most people were expecting for some commissioner, to be voted down, and this didn't happen so far. And I think Fito has the highest chances of maybe not even being voted down, but at least being downgraded. Because I think what bothers some MEPs is the fact that his status is so high that he will be a vice president. But again, I think Ursula von der Leyen made a good job of coming up with this very precise structure of the European Commission, because if you take away just one puzzle, everything else, will fall apart. So I think what is possible is to get rid of his vice president title, but as for voting him down completely, I'm not sure about that.
Thank you so much, Tomasz Zając, analyst at the Polish Institute of International Affairs, for all your input this evening.
Thank you very much.
And that completes our edition of World News Tonight here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more here on TVP World.